Hello, and welcome to our webinar on artificial intelligence in your workplace. I'm Amber Dodds, a partner in Bracewell's San Antonio office, and I'm here with my colleague, Jonathon Hance, who is a partner in our Houston office. I practice in the area of labor and employment law, while Jonathon specializes in intellectual property and litigation. As we begin, I'd like to give credit to Jonathon for raising many of these issues that we'll address in this webinar today internally at our firm and getting us thinking about the topic of artificial intelligence and its impact on both employment and the practice of law. So, kudos to Jonathon here. As he and I started thinking about AI in the workplace, one of our first questions was how common AI use is in the workplace. We read a lot of studies on this topic, and as you will see with the studies listed on the slide, there are varying answers. For example, the Workforce Lab from Slack survey found that in January 2024, a quarter of desk workers were using AI tools for work. Even more, the Microsoft and LinkedIn survey found 75% of knowledge workers were using AI at work. And Jonathon, you made a great point when we were discussing this the other day.
Yes, that's only the employees that are willing to admit to it, right?
That's right, exactly. But what really struck us is the speed with which AI use is increasing in the workplace. Remember that many of the AI tools available to employees have only been around for the past couple of years. What these surveys are showing, the Slack survey, for example, are increases from 1 in 5 workers in September 2023 to 1 in 4 in January 2024. And the Microsoft survey showing 46% of workers were new to the use of AI at work in the past 6 months. So while these surveys may seem far apart with respect to how many employees are using AI at work, they do show the strong trend of increasing AI use. Also, those differences could reflect differences in how the surveys and respondents think about what constitutes AI. Jonathon, can you take us through the types of AI that employees may be using for work?
Amber, I'd be delighted to. So, as a bit of background, before becoming a lawyer, I had aspirations of becoming a computer scientist, and I even owned an IT consulting firm prior to and during law school. So, for my junior year science fair project back in high school, I developed an AI program to identify various minerals based on inputting a description of their characteristics, such as hardness or color, into the computer program, and it would tell you that you have gold or a diamond or fool's gold. The computer program I wrote intelligently made decisions about the rock it was asked to identify based on rules baked into the program. This was artificial intelligence of the 90s, and it won all sorts of awards, including a pretty nifty at the time monetary award from Intel. And that kind of program is what we would call traditional AI. These are computer programs that follow rules to intelligently perform tasks based on perceived decision making. Generative AI, on the other hand, is the relatively new branch of AI that uses large language-based data sets and probabilistic modeling to generate content, especially by predicting the next piece of desired content after a given prompt, and then iterating that process over and over again. So today, when most people are talking about AI, they're probably referring to this newer type of generative AI. But given the breadth of the definition of AI, many products claim to use AI when they're really just talking about the old rules-based traditional AI, like my junior year science fair project that could identify rocks. But let's look in more detail at the differences between these types of AI and some examples. So traditional AI works best with defined rule sets that are unlikely to change, like my rule sets identifying rocks. Rocks don't really change, and their characteristics don't really change. So a program that essentially walks through a decision tree to identify a particular rock works quite well. The more data the program has to draw from and the more computing power it has to work through the data set, the results become quicker and more accurate. So for decades, we've been working to improve computing power and to build big data sets. As a result, though, of the advancements in computing power, we have some really amazing traditional AI tools like phone-based help desk services and the WebMD symptom checker. In a help desk model, the computer follows a script based on inputs from you. That is, until you get super frustrated and ask to see a supervisor. Another example is the WebMD symptom checker, which again follows a decision tree to determine your health conditions based on your symptoms. Generative AI, on the other hand, does not follow a predefined rule set. And this, to some extent, drives computer programmers absolutely crazy. The results produced by generative AI models can be different every time, even if identical prompts are used. So, generative AI models analyze and generate responses based on the probability of a content X occurring with the content Y. In other words, generative AI models use computing power to analyze content data sets to determine the relationships between pieces of content in that data set. Content can be just about anything: words, images, videos. And by understanding the relationships between pieces of content, the model can generate outputs that appear to be intelligent and that can seem very human like. And like humans, the models have a bit of randomness built into them, so the outputs are at least slightly different every time. Now, I know this sounds complicated, so let's take a look at one specific example of generative AI to better explain how these models work. One example type of a generative AI model is the pre-trained transformer model. Now, I'm sure you've all heard the word GPT, but now you know what it stands for: generated pre-trained transformer. So, what does that mean? GPT describes a model that is pre-trained on a large language model data source using the transformer deep learning model developed by researchers at Google. But in layman terms, the GPT models essentially work by modeling the probability that one part of a word, called a token, is related to another part of a word. And then using that model, the program can predict the next part of a word that will occur after a given prompt. So I've got this diagrammed out on the next slide. If you look at the top, you'll see we have a large database of writing. You could think the Reddit database, right? All those comments that for years you've been posting on Reddit are now being fed into a model generator, the green circle in the middle of the page. And that model generator, using some very intense computing power, generates a large language model based on all different sources of publicly available or licensed writing. Then, if we follow the diagram across the bottom, we start on the left side with the prompt. That's where you, the user, now begins to interact with the tool by asking it questions or giving it information. It then takes your prompt, filters it through the large language model, and then uses a content generator to predict the next string, token, or word that comes after the prompt you have given it based on all of the statistical relationships between the words that have been put into the large language model. So, as an example, we all know the phrase, I think, therefore I. Now you are all filling in the blank, am. I think, therefore I am. This is a very common English language phrase. And so, in a GPT model, if you think about that model generator as I'm feeding it content with phrases including I think, therefore I am, the model is generating the potential relationships between the word I and what might come after the I. Words that might come after the I are I think, therefore I see, or I think, therefore I believe, or I think, therefore I do, or I think, therefore I party. But the most common would be I think, therefore I am. And therefore, if you give the phrase I think, therefore I am to the GPT model, most of them will write back I think, therefore I am, because am has the highest probability of following that entire phrase, I think, therefore I. So we can repeat this process using the model on the next slide to generate more complex responses. So, for example, I might ask it to write 2 or 3 sentences to thank my interviewer, reiterating my excitement for the job opportunity while keeping it cool. Don't make it too formal. And so now the model is the content generator is looking at the relationships between all of those words in my prompt and considering all of those multifaceted relationships, looking for the next thing that might come after it. And so it generates the text. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. I'm really excited about the opportunity, and everything we discussed just reinforced how much I'd love to be a part of the team. Looking forward to hear from you soon. So the model thinks those phrases repeated over and over and over again to get that length of response are the phrases and tokens of words that would come after the prompt that I gave the chat GPT. So based on this architecture, There are now many tools available, and there are new ones coming online daily, many of which you've heard of. ChatGPT is probably the most common and ubiquitous tool in the marketplace right now. But there's also Claude, which functions very similarly to ChatGPT. And then there are more proprietary models like Microsoft Copilot that are now becoming baked into the Microsoft Office suites. We also see specialized tools like Perplexity and Codium. Codium, for example, is a great resource for computer programmers. It's also becoming more common to see AI tools baked into retail products such as Amazon's shopping tool. And we're even seeing specialized tools for lawyers pop up through Thomson Reuters, such as the CoCounsel product. And in particular, in the HR space, we're seeing an abundant set of tools come out that assist with various HR and employer related tasks. For example, PeopleBox is a Gen I powered talent management platform designed to enhance HR functions such as hiring, performance management, goal setting, and career development. Lattice is a performance evaluation tool. Textio writes job descriptions. Pymetrics assesses candidates' soft skills such as effort, risk tolerance, decision making, attention, focus, learning, fairness, generosity, and emotion. Checker does background checks, and then we even see AI baked into very common and widely used payroll and workforce management tools such as Workday and UKG. Amber, I think now it might be helpful to show the attendees of the webinar a few examples of what AI can do so we can get a real flavor for its capabilities. So, Amber, on the screen, we have ChatGPT, which is, as I mentioned earlier, probably the most ubiquitous GPT tool available to the public. It's available for free to download. Anybody can use it with some limitations. And for about $20 a month, you can use the full featured version of ChatGPT that I'm going to show you today. So what I did here to save some time is I went ahead and developed a couple of prompts, but I thought, how might you use ChatGPT in your personal life? What's an example of that? So I've come up with a prompt that might help me with my dinner selection tonight. I'm going to ask ChatGPT, I'm going to tell it it's a restaurant critic that has particular experience in Houston restaurants that are enjoyable for adults with elementary age children. It's Friday night. That's the time we're pretending it's going to be. It's Friday night. And after a long week, I'm looking for a restaurant to enjoy with my wife and my kids who are 4 and 8. My kids love chicken, and my wife and I would like to have a cocktail. It's been a long week. So can you give me 3 recommendations? And here, in the time it took me to read you the prompt, it's come up with Barnaby's Cafe, which indeed is a great adults and children's place in Houston. It's come up with Punky's Pizza and Pasta. I've never heard of that one. Who knows if it's real? We'll figure out that in a minute. And Beckru Winehouse, which is, I think, also a decent choice. So what else could ChatGPT do? Well, if you're a computer programmer, you might ask it to write a fully functional web page that can play a user tic-tac-toe. And again, in about the time it took me to read the prompt, I'm generating an HTML web page, and then I'm going to generate some JavaScript and some CSS, and ultimately I'm going to be off to the races. So I went ahead and put these files into the files, cut and pasted the content in, and indeed have generated a playable tic-tac-toe program. There we go. So now we can play our tic-tac-toe game. Now, as an interesting aside, I mentioned my junior year computer science project where I developed an AI program to categorize rocks. But a few years earlier, my end of the semester project was to develop a tic-tac-toe game in C++. This is very similar to what I had to develop. And I'll just say it took me weeks of time and researching algorithms and banging my head against a wall to do what ChatGPT did in just a couple of moments. So ChatGPT could also be interesting from a training perspective, an employee training perspective. One thing I deal with as a partner at a law firm practicing litigation is I routinely need to train young associates to do things like take depositions. And so I thought maybe ChatGPT can help me. So I've now told ChatGPT that it's a lawyer who teaches deposition techniques, and I've asked it to create a simulation where it will pretend to be the witness, and I will pretend to be the lawyer asking it questions. And so now it's come up with its witness name, Alec Johnson. It tells me he's a former manager at XYZ Corp. It tells me that it's in the context of a terminated employee who claims their termination was due to discrimination based on gender. and it gives me a couple of instructions. But now I could interact with Alex Johnson just like he's a real witness. So, Mr. Johnson, tell me why you think you have a claim. Obviously, a bad deposition question, but let's just see what it does with it. And now he says, I'm the manager. So, see, I messed up because I didn't read the whole context, but he's going to correct me, right? Because he's the witness. He says, I'm the manager who made the decision to terminate the employee, Jamie Wallace. Why did you terminate her? Says she was terminated due to poor performance. So you could see how that could be useful in the training context. We could go on, and then even ask it to give us feedback. Now, one more I thought I would show you is what ChatGPT can do with large data sets. So I'm going to give it a file that actually is one of the Excel files that was disclosed as a part of the Enron emails in the Enron litigation. These are publicly available materials, but I'm going to give it a spreadsheet and then ask it to analyze this spreadsheet. And you might think if you have employees that are working on data analytics, that this would be one of the things they might decide to do with ChatGPT. So while it analyzes this data, we'll see what it does here. So it's going to give me an overview. It's going to say that it's got all these different classes of assets, and I'll show you the data that it's looking at while it analyzes it. So the data is these Excel sheets that are thousands of lines long with very complicated financial information in the database, in the data set. And in just a matter of moments, ChatGPT has given me a rundown of the data set and a lot of critical information about it. And I could even ask it to do things like generate charts based on the data set. So I could ask it to create a pie chart showing the 7 biggest asset categories. So it's going to analyze that. And notice my sentences don't have to be all that precise. I could even have typos in them, and it's still going to be able to work. So it's going to even adjust the approach, provide the correct visualization. So it's kind of helping me out here, and it's going to summarize the data using the pie chart for the 7 biggest asset categories. Let's see if it does that. So now it's kind of corrected my prompt. It's helped me out by explaining why I was wrong about how I was viewing the data, and then has given me this nice little chart showing how the asset categories for Enron in this financial spreadsheet are broken down. So Amber, with that, let's go back to you and look at some of the legal developments on AI in light of the just incredible tool this is for the workplace, but also some of the incredible potential dangers and risks that come with using generative AI technology.
You bet, Jonathan. And what a great lead in with the various ways that AI can function. And one of those in particular is the use of analysis of large data sets. So let's begin with the EEOC. At the EEOC, there's been a continued interest in how AI is applied in the employment space and whether there are discriminatory effects of that application. The EEOC's interest began in 2016, but was really highlighted with the 2021 initiative on AI and algorithmic fairness, in which EEOC Chair Charlotte Burrows expressed a focus on the way AI may be used for hiring and other employment decisions to, quote, ensure that these new technologies do not become a high-tech pathway to discrimination, end quote. She also noted that the EEOC's systemic investigators received extensive training in 2021 on the use of AI in employment practices. That's where those big data sets that Jonathan was just showing you come in. Following that initiative, the EEOC has issued 2 technical assistance documents. The first, in May 2022, focused on the potential for AI tools to either screen out or more negatively score individuals with disabilities in an evaluation process, or for employers to fail to reasonably accommodate such individuals if they needed a modification to the AI process. As examples, the EEOC pointed to knowledge tests requiring keyboard use that did not accurately measure an individual's knowledge when the individual had a manual dexterity limitation because of a medical condition, particularly when those tests were timed. Another example given in the guidance was the need for the AI tool to be compatible with accessibility technologies such as screen readers. In its second technical assistance guidance in May 2023, The EEOC focused on Title VII and the potential for AI tools at various stages in the hiring process or during employment to have a disparate impact on individuals in protected categories, such as race, sex, religion, or national origin. As a preview to Jonathon's upcoming discussion on ethics, such a disparate impact claim could result from various types of bias within the AI tool. For example, if a tool is trained on data that's based predominantly on examples from a group in one protected category, it may screen out or more negatively rate candidates who are outside of that protected category. We saw this with Amazon's resume reviewing tool, which Amazon determined disproportionately screened out female candidates because it was based on a data set of primarily male resumes. As another example, if the tool is coded using certain indicators for resume review, using vocabulary or factors more often used by one group, it may unintentionally discriminate against candidates who use different vocabulary to describe the same or equally significant past experience. Notably, in its guidance, the EEOC emphasized that employers will be held responsible for these potential biases, even if they're relying on a vendor's AI tool. One of the EEOC's first settlements in the AI discrimination arena provides a clear example of how this bias may occur. In August 2023, the EEOC announced a settlement with iTutor Group. In that case, which involved an organization that hired remote English teachers for students in China, an applicant applied 2 times. First, with their real birth date, and a second time with a much more recent birth date. The applicant was granted an interview only when they appeared much younger in their application. The EEOC, in the litigation, alleged that iTutor Group's AI software automatically rejected all female candidates over the age of 55 and all male candidates over the age of 60, resulting in the rejection of over 200 applicants based solely on their age. The EEOC isn't the only agency interested in potential discriminatory effects of AI. We are seeing movement in the state level as well. As examples, Illinois implemented the Artificial Intelligence Video Interview Act in 2020, which required employers to notify candidates and obtain consent before using AI to analyze recorded interview submissions. Illinois followed up this year with amendments to the Illinois Human Rights Act, which will be effective in 2026. Those amendments address both prohibitions on using AI in a manner that discriminates against individuals based on a protected category and includes notice requirements. Another example with a lot of press coverage is the New York City regulations on AI use in hiring and promotion decisions. These regulations focus on tools that substantially assist or replace discretionary decision-making. The regulations require extensive annual bias auditing of those tools by an independent auditor, publication of a summary of the audit, and ensuring that certain notices are given to applicants or employees who are being evaluated by the tool. I also list here as another example California Civil Rights Council's notice of proposed rulemaking. But we want to emphasize that similar legislation is under consideration or pending already in many states. So this is a rapidly changing issue. While the majority of developments in the employment-specific space have focused on AI use in the process of selecting candidates for hire or employees for promotion, there is also focus on AI use that could violate current employment laws in other ways. The Department of Labor, for example, issued a field assistance bulletin in April of this year, which focuses on tools that track work time, measure worker performance, set work schedules, assign tasks, or perform human resource functions such as automatically generating communications in response to employee leave requests. This bulletin is a helpful reminder that various automated management tools must be double-checked to ensure that they are not inadvertently implicating employer legal obligations in spaces such as proper pay practices or administration, for example, of the Family and Medical Leave Act. That said, Jonathan, let me send it back to you to address other potential ethical implications of AI use.
Thanks, Amber. I was particularly interested in hearing about the tools that had disproportionately filtered out female applicants. And I think that hits right on the first ethical consideration I have is that generative AI models can be biased based on their information sources. When we did the demo, I showed how the ChatGPT tool was capable of analyzing an Enron data set, but most ChatGPT tools now are trained on the Enron dataset because it is a large, publicly available, free source of data. So I'll just pose the question, what are the ethical implications of including the Enron emails in the model? How do emails between executives that ultimately resulted in one of the largest frauds in American history influence the statistical analysis for relationships between words and portions of words? And how do we even study that impact? And like many real humans, generative AI models can also be wrong. Perhaps that's not terrible by itself, but what happens if your workforce blindly uses AI assuming that it's infallible? Although generative AI tools behave like human intelligence, they are not a human intelligence. Well, at least not yet. We also don't have a clear guidance right now on who owns the IP to AI generated content. And that is currently a hotly debated subject. What happens, for example, when your smart inventors get into a room and invite ChatGPT or Claude or another AI tool into the brainstorming process? And that tool, in fact, comes up with the inventive spark that leads to a patent or an invention. Is that invention really the invention of your inventors or of this humanoid like tool that they invited into the brainstorming session? And would you even know about it as the employer that is going on in that room? The need to feed AI models more data also raises concerns about surveillance and data privacy. Because models are trained on language, more language is required to continue training the models. And to date, we are running out of publicly available, free, or licensable sources of data, leading to the need to create more data to train the models, which gives rise to serious concerns about surveillance and data privacy, particularly with respect to your own personal data. How is it being gathered and how does it fit into the model? So, we also have some ethical implications about personal data related to the data given to the system, not necessarily to train the models, but just as your prompt. So, I thought it might be helpful to illustrate this point by looking at the privacy policy for ChatGPT. And to note that generative AI tools do not necessarily keep your personal data, including your prompts, confidential. So here's what ChatGPT says. We collect personal data related to you. And that means if you create an account to use our services, we can collect things like user content, which includes your prompts and other content you upload, such as files, images, and audio, depending on the features you use. So in my demo today, I provided personal data to ChatGPT. It now knows that my kids like chicken and I'd like to have a cocktail after a long week. That is personal information about me that is now subject to the ChatGPT privacy policy. So on the next slide, let's look at how they can use that new data that I gave ChatGPT. ChatGPT is pretty clear about it. We may use your personal data, my prompt, everything I gave it today, to provide, analyze, and maintain our services, for example, to respond to your questions for ChatGPT. Also, to improve and develop our services and conduct research, for example, to develop new product features. And as noted above, it says, we may use content you provide us to improve our services, for example, to train the models that power ChatGPT. So I am now, unless I opt out, and I'll show that in a minute, unless I opt out, by providing information to ChatGPT, I'm actually feeding back into the training resources, words and language that are used to further train the model to look at relationships between words. And if you're looking to build a great model, it makes 100% to do that with the prompts that are going in because that's another source of language. Thankfully, ChatGPT says, read our instructions to find out how you can opt out of using your content to train our models. And on the next slide, you'll see that there are data controls built into ChatGPT, particularly the paid accounts. And what I would recommend if your organization is thinking about exploring GPT products is to investigate the terms of use and the privacy policy, particularly as they relate to paid accounts, because the tools have started over time to be mindful of the data privacy issue and to start putting tools, policies, procedures in place to ensure that data is more controlled than under the free accounts. Here, ChatGPT, for example, allows me to improve the model for everyone if I check the box, but also to opt out of using my data to train the model. I can also delete my chats, export my data so I can see what they've gathered, and delete my account. And pursuant to their privacy policy, they say that they will delete my data, though I've not followed up to ask them about it. Amber, let's go now to some ethical implications of using AI at work, particularly for lawyers. So in July, the American Bar Association released its first formal ethics opinion covering the use of generative AI in the practice of law. It's been a hot topic for the past 18 months. What does it mean as lawyers to use AI in the practice of law? And what we're seeing is the ABA, as well as the state bars, have essentially said, we're not changing the rules just because we have a new technology. Lawyers must still provide competent legal representation, protect client information, communicate fully with clients, and this one's a little tricky with AI, charge reasonable fees. Specific to that point, the Texas State Bar acknowledged the confidentiality concerns, but then also questioned very specifically whether it's ethical to charge fees for services performed by humans when those services could be performed by AI at much lower costs. That's a pretty wild concept, to think that the state bar is effectively encouraging lawyers to think about how it can use AI to lower costs for clients, but while maintaining the other ethical obligations of confidentiality and confident representation, which may be difficult to do in light of the privacy policies governing these tools and the earlier ethical implications we looked at of being biased and potentially generating inaccurate answers. So let's look at a couple of the applicable ABA rules. First off, Rule 1.1, competence. Right at the beginning, first rule in the ABA obligates lawyers to provide competent representation to clients and requires that they exercise legal knowledge and skill and thoroughness and preparation reasonably necessary in their representation. And you've seen states like Texas conclude that rules like this strongly imply that lawyers should know how to use tools that could be beneficial to their practice, like using research tools, right? It would be inappropriate for a lawyer to say, I'm not going to learn how to look up cases on Westlaw. I only use the books. That's a legal tool that adds to the diligence in the legal practice. And we are expected to be knowledgeable on current technologies that may aid our representation in our clients. Rule 1.6, confidentiality of information, is that the lawyer must keep client information confidential unless the client gives informed consent. So that raises a lot of questions about AI, where an AI tool may actually have my client confidential information, provided I give it to it in a prompt, even if it's to provide services or for my client. I'm still providing that information to a third-party tool. The information is leaving my physical possession, and I am now entrusting it to a third party. That may raise questions of confidentiality. Rule 1.4, communications. A lawyer must inform a client promptly of any information the client should receive. This idea of I got to communicate with my client. So if perhaps that may mean that if I'm using a chat GPT type tool to service a client, I may need to let them know that I'm using that tool. And that raises a lot of questions because there are tools that lawyers use on a day-to-day basis that are not part of the ongoing conversation with the client. Today, I used Microsoft Word to help write your legal brief. That's sort of so basic that we don't even think to raise the issue with the client. We might not even tell the client we're using Westlaw versus Lexis to do research. But with new tools like ChatGPT or Claude or Microsoft Copilot that might implicate obligations of confidentiality, we may have an obligation to inform our clients as to the use of those tools. And then 1.5, counterbalancing all of this is the idea that lawyers must charge clients reasonable fees. And so if we have an AI tool that can generate an accurate response to a question in a few seconds versus a few hours, is it reasonable to use ChatGPT or another GPT tool to aid in the practice, which may result in a reduction in fees to the client? Now, I'll submit to you, I think all of these are unanswered questions at this point, primarily because the tools are in such a state of flux and development. Even compared to 6 months ago, the tools are much more accurate in the content they provide, although they're not flawless, but they're getting better. The tools are also becoming cheaper to use and easier to use, and they're putting in mechanisms for further protecting confidential information. In fact, ChatGPT now will agree to enter into a HIPAA business associate agreement so that you can provide it HIPAA protected personal information that covered entities may have under HIPAA. So now, if a hospital wanted to engage in ChatGPT to review certain patient information, they can actually treat ChatGPT as a business associate compliant with HIPAA. That's a pretty wild, fascinating development. And you see this happening because the tools realize that if they don't provide accommodations to protect personal information and data, they, they just cannot be widely adopted because we have the countervailing ethical obligations as lawyers, but also outside of the practice of law of confidentiality and competence. So, with that, Amber, I'm going to turn it back to you to talk about some specific workplace developments that I think will be helpful in light of our discussion of these tools and the ethics of using them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan. A lot to think about in the area of ethics and AI. And to your very good point, although as lawyers, we have many obligations related to our law license, many of you in your industries have similar ethical obligations to your clients and need to think through some of the questions Jonathan was just raising for lawyers in your practice areas. As Jonathan indicated, we'd like now to turn to some of the practical aspects of AI's effect on the workplace. First, we've talked a lot about legal developments focused on ensuring AI's use to evaluate and select candidates doesn't discriminate based on unlawful or, frankly, unforeseen factors. But we also anticipate AI changing not how the selection is made, but who. We foresee an increasing level of consideration on candidates' AI skills as part of the skills necessary to perform those job functions. Certainly possible. We will see questions related to AI on job applications or being asked in job interviews in the future. Many candidates are developing those skills for employers, and those skills will be necessary to perform some of the jobs they're applying for. We also foresee those candidates starting to list in the proficiency section on their resumes, not just computer tools such as Word or Excel, but many of the tools that Jonathan has told us about earlier in the presentation that are AI tools. Similarly, employment positions are going to change as employers find ways and employees, frankly, to leverage AI to perform some functions previously performed by employees. AI use will likely result in the removal of some of the current functions of your jobs and additions. Those additions, either functions that involve AI use or other functions that can be performed in lieu of the functions AI has taken over performing. So you may need to reconsider job descriptions in your company and revise them to reflect these changes. Finally, another question that employers should proactively consider, and which we've talked about today, is how AI affects employee growth and development. AI may be taking on many of the tasks that entry-level employees historically performed, and which allowed those employees to learn the basics of their field. This can certainly lead to concerns that employees are required to monitor AI output for substantive correctness, but don't have the experience or exposure to make that evaluation. So, a real concern is for AI to result in the loss of experiential on the job training, particularly early in an employee's career. Jonathan, I loved your take on this. One of the examples that you showed earlier, AI and training. What can be the positive there?
There are some positives, Amber, about training, but counterbalanced with the potential negative aspects of it, right? The ability to absorb your business performing some of those low-level entry tasks that now ChatGPT or these other tools may be capable of performing very quickly does give rise to a loss, perhaps, of learning by osmosis. The way I hope that employers may start to think about AI as a way to offload some of those tasks that employees at all levels found frustrating and menial, and give those employees a chance to do things that are more higher value or better use for their time during the day. As an example, I found that I would spend about 15 minutes on Monday mornings getting my to-do list in order for the week. That's a task that Microsoft Copilot can perform for me in a matter of moments by giving me, as I walk into the office, my 10 things that are on my to-do list, ordering them by priority, and analyzing my calendar for availability of meetings throughout the week. So it effectively operates as a personal assistant, setting my schedule, giving me 30 minutes back in my day to do other things that enrich our business. So I see AI moving that way in a positive light. There's certainly a negative side of it as well.
You bet, Jonathan. A great reminder that as with many aspects of employment, you should be prepared for various responses from employees to AI in the workplace. You've just given us a very positive example. But as Jonathan and I prepared for this webinar, many of the headline grabbing responses that we saw on employee reactions to AI focused on fear and uncertainty, primarily that AI will eliminate the need for their job altogether, resulting in a job loss or a change in a job that makes their job unrecognizable to employees. Fear and uncertainty also can center on how AI may be used at work, on whether using AI is just passing off the computer's work as my own, or whether I really need to attribute what portion, if I can even determine that, of my work product was created by AI. One very surprising study we found in our preparation was a Harvard Business Review study from earlier this year that divided a group of employees into two sets, one of which used AI and one did not. In the group that used AI, the study found employees reporting increased rates of loneliness, isolation, and missing previous face-to-face interactions with coworkers. These employees even reported negative health consequences, such as increased alcohol consumption and insomnia. So, really something to think about with respect to how employees are interacting with one another and how AI plays into that, whether it be replacing altogether that interaction. And if so, how can we encourage interaction in other ways? On the flip side, as Jonathan was just mentioning, is employee enthusiasm for AI to eliminate the more administrative functions that they just simply don't like doing. The Slack survey we reference here found 80% of employee respondents saying AI technology had already improved their productivity, 42% saying they're excited about AI handling some of the tasks of the various things they do in their current job. So, again, the point here is that employees will think about AI in various ways. So, it's important as employers to be thinking about the various reactions you may get in your workforce. So, what's next? Let's talk about thinking about AI in your workplace. First, it's important to begin with understanding what AI means for you in your workplace. What tools does that mean now or in the future? Jonathan and I certainly looked at studies in preparing for this webinar showing a clear disconnect, for example, between the legal and HR departments of the same employer on whether AI use was occurring at all in the same workplace. One option as a starting point to help understand AI in your workplace may be to conduct an audit of what's currently going on. Jonathan, you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think, Amber, there's so many employees that just won't tell you they're using AI, right? They don't want this idea that I might be viewed as less of an employee because this great work product I've been producing for 6 months isn't actually mine. And
You're right. You're proving that you're replaceable.
you've just proven it. And what's interesting about AI tools, Professor Ethan Mollick, who is at the Wharton School, he describes the effect on employees as taking the C employees and bringing them up to a B average. So now all employees are kind of at that B average. You still need the extra spark and expertise to go from the B to the A. So I think in conducting the audit, it's appropriate to let the employees know that we're aware there's some use and maybe even it's okay. we're bringing our workforce up to the B, we expect even more from the workforce. We expect that extra spark of genius to get from the B to the A, but to make employees not feel bad about disclosing the use, because you want to know about the use that's going on. The other tricky part about the audit is the personal device. Any employee can, particularly if you have a bring your own device policy or do not require personal devices to be checked at the door and left in the car, then your entire workforce has access to free tools that perform AI functions on their smartphone. And that's a big difference over adoption of prior software tools that might assist an employee in the workplace. They are so ubiquitous and available and completely free that it's highly likely that your workforce, at least a portion of them, already has these tools on their personal device, and absent monitoring, maybe using them in the workplace in a way that you won't know unless you observe or ask and they're willing to tell you.
So, as part of that audit and that process, you'll be trying to figure out what's going to be your organization's overall approach to AI use. Lots to consider here, in addition to gathering information about what employees may already be doing or may want to do. Does your organization have agreements with clients or customers that address or limit AI use? Similar question with respect to insurance policies and whether or not how they interact and whether or not they prevent certain types of AI use by employees. As Jonathon was just mentioning, do we want employees to be involved in setting the organization's approach to AI use? You may have employees out there who are fantastic users of AI who can help you understand how to leverage AI in a way that works well in your workplace. Are there specific legal, ethical, or regulatory implications for AI use by your employees? Certainly, many of the questions Jonathon talked about in his discussion of legal ethics are those things that he and I are thinking about in our workplace, but certainly maybe legal or ethical regulatory implications in yours as well.
And Amber, one thing I might add to those that are embarking on this fresh and new, if you haven't used any of the AI tools, don't put your sensitive information in it. Don't put your business information in it until you've made sure that the right agreements and tools are in place. But take the free Chat GPT or the free Claude and just play with it for about 10 hours. And I would strongly encourage you to play with it. 10 hours, I think, is about the right time to experiment with the tools so you can understand some of their capabilities and begin to learn how to interact with them, which will give you some insight on how your employees may be using them. I think if you go into this discussion with the employees not fully understanding how the tools work and how they might be used, you may have some blind spots in your audit and your investigation of the use in the workplace.
Sure, and Jonathon, you and I are a great example. You encouraged me to do the same, and I found out a lot just in seeing kind of some of the demos you've done today. We've done together before. For example, I had assumed that the prompts needed to be more precise and more clear, and you've certainly shown me there are many ways to ask AI and push AI with follow up questions in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise understood, but by just kind of playing with it, seeing how it worked.
The fun part is it's not a human intelligence, but it's designed to behave like one. So in interacting with it, the way you get the best results from it are to treat it like you're having a personal conversation with your next door neighbor standing across the fence, right? You can be casual, you can ask follow-ups, you can, come back around to the same point, but that's how you're going to get the best results out of the AI. And then you can also give AI the persona that you want it to be, which is the really fascinating part. Is it can be your lawyer, it can be your therapist, it can be your doctor, it can be your engineer. You just have to tell it what role it is playing in the conversation. And by giving it that little piece of information, you've now changed the word relationships, and you get different results.
So, other questions to be thinking about for AI in your workplace. As you're determining what tools are out there, what investments is your organization willing to make in AI? As Jonathon indicated, paid AI tools certainly have many more features than the free tools. It may be worth it to pay for those tools and also to invest in employee training on those tools. On the flip side, will any particular AI tools be prohibited and why? Really understand what the concerns are, what the risks are with those tools, and you can monitor them over time to see if the tools are mitigating those risks in the future. Another one Jonathon mentioned is monitoring. If you allow AI use in your workplace, and if so, how will you be monitoring that AI use? Will you be requiring employees to report use of AI in their work product? And if so, with what level of detail? So, as your organization formulates its approach to AI use, training, and monitoring, it's important to convey to employees what the expectations are. We talked about employee uncertainty being rooted in part in not understanding what their employer wanted from them. One way to set expectations is through an AI policy. This policy should explain how your organization defines AI. Remember, you'll have a wide breadth of employees who think about AI in different ways and understand it at different levels. The policy should also explain whether and how your organization allows, limits, or prohibits AI use. If certain AI platforms are approved or required, consider identifying those in the AI policy, as well as specifically identifying platforms that are prohibited from use. Your policy should clearly articulate, if AI use is allowed, the expectations on employees regarding whether they may identify whether their work product involves AI contributions, to Jonathon's great example about the inventors brainstorming with AI, and that employees remain responsible for ensuring the substantive accuracy of produced work. The policy should address how confidential information may be used and must be protected with respect to AI. Remember, of course, that the policy should account for the rapidly changing AI landscape and will need to be reviewed and updated on a regular basis. In addition to the policy, you should be communicating with your employees regarding the specific AI tools that are approved or prohibited, how to access those tools, and where they can get training on AI use. Jonathon, any last thoughts on AI in the workplace, communicating with employees?
Amber, I think you just did such a great job walking us through many things to think about. Maybe the one thing I would add is to involve employees and stakeholders at all levels of the organization in the conversation about AI. You'll find more that way about how AI is actually being used in your workplace. And you'll probably have the benefit of some creative ideas about how AI might help your company.
You bet. With that, Jonathon and I have had a great time sharing with you some of the insights we've found regarding the intersection of AI and employment. We'd like to invite you to join our colleagues Amy and Caroline for the next Bracewell webinar, which will focus on the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. That webinar will be on December 5th at 10 a.m. Thank you for attending and have a great day.
It's been a pleasure.